So I would say, been pretty involved in the energy, climate, and environment space for several years now. It started really in high school. Um, During my time in high school, I was involved with our school's environmental club. We raised $150,000 for solar panels at our school, and that was my first sort of exposure to the industry, to the space. And it's been a great experience since. I've really enjoyed getting to meet different board members and staff members of Slipstream and getting to better understand sort of the work that it does as a mission-driven nonprofit, and have just been really inspired and just really enjoy being a part of an organization that has such a sort of laser sharp focus when it comes to incorporating a bunch of different dimensions, especially when it comes to equity, but also just on climate and energy issues in general. So in high school, I think working on the solar project, what that really exposed me to was um, just understanding how different organizations work given different constraints that they face. So I had a chance during that project to work with the school district, but also in addition to that, work with different nonprofits in the community, work with different foundations for grants in the community, work with different sort of individual stakeholders like parents, alumni, et cetera, and also with local government and also with businesses in terms of sponsorship. So that was sort of my first exposure to sort of understanding how different organizations work and operate. Since then, I think one thing that I've tried to do during my time serving on different boards is just figure out not just echoing what is necessarily already stated or given as sort of assumptions, but try to offer a unique or diverse set of perspectives that can sort of push organizations in certain directions, especially in this time of transition where that line of thinking is really needed, and being able to think outside of the box, I think. That's what I think actually makes this problem being climate change so uniquely interesting, is that one, it's almost unlike any other issue. It's so interdisciplinary, bringing in all these different topics and professions and disciplines together, but also in that it's not just a technological problem, or it's not just an economic problem, or not just a policy problem, but that question of aligning incentives and stakeholders' interests is so important, and that's when it comes down to it, it's about sort of relationships and people. Short answer is yeah. It's been really interesting to see what kind of arguments speak to different people in different ways, and trying to leverage them as best as possible. I think I've always been an incredibly optimistic person, but that optimism has always been grounded in a sense of pragmatism as well. Do I think that we are in a better position now than a couple years ago? It's hard to say because there's trends sort of that push pull tension in both directions. But one thing that I think that's really interesting is that there's been broader recognition in general, at least of where are we trying to go? What is our North Star kind of destination? Whereas and now even people who aren't sort of involved necessarily in the climate or energy space can even begin to articulate that. Whereas before there was some disagreement, like we may not even fully agree on where we want to go, but now we know, okay, for example, um, by 2050, net zero emissions, for example. There's just general recognition of where we need to go, and it's just a question of how do we get there faster? How do we continue to make sort of progress faster? How do you leverage economics, policy, and technology together and finance together sort of in alignment such that we can get there faster? So that to me is, I think, the more that I'm involved in the space, the more um, positive momentum I see and feel. And I think that soon we're going to reach tipping points that will, continue to accelerate action. I remember when I first, quote unquote, started off in terms of environmental climate related work, environmental justice was always seen as, oh, you're sort of kind of sort of this fringe group. You're not really if you're talking about environmental justice, then you're distracting from sort of the core goal that we're trying to solve here, which is emissions reductions as quickly as possible. But I think that one thing that's been really powerful as a result of this sort of broad national reckoning with sort of racial injustice is that there's this recognition that environmental justice is not a trade-off with climate action, but rather it can be an accelerant. And to me, that just underscores the sort of systemic nature behind how environmental issues are not just sort of separate from other issues, but are very much connected. One class that I took this past semester, it was called environmental politics, but really what it looked at was the underlying social and cultural factors that influence how we view certain issues as a society. And one sort of topic that we talked about was this role of expertise. And I think that's very important, is because a lot of government or private sector stakeholders that are developing different corporate sustainability plans, or let's say climate action plans, um, a lot of certain communities, they may to a lesser degree have traditional markers of expertise, in part because a lot of those sort of higher education sort of accessibility issues have been a big issue. And just because someone does not have a traditional background that denotes, oh, this person is a subject matter expert, does not mean that they don't have a valuable perspective to tell. And I think that's part of the issue is, again, gets back to that systemic issue, is a lack of representation in higher ed is related to this, because the people whose voices are reflected when you're developing, a climate action plan, typically you may, let's say, go to University of Wisconsin-Madison professors and ask for their input in terms of different modeling exercises. And that's valuable and that's certainly important. But too often that's seen as you are the single bearer of the subject matter expertise. I think that's an issue. And I think that's ultimately why representation matters. I think that the perspectives that I can bring as a young person who doesn't have decades of industry experience is not necessarily less valuable. It's just valuable in a different way, hopefully, in the sense that I can see, okay, what are things that you're taking for granted in the industry that don't necessarily make sense, that don't necessarily have to be that way, and having that fresh set of eyes and that fresh set of perspectives. Inevitably, you're going to have blind spots as an organization, right? And having a wider set of eyes to sort of look at things will give you more robust results ultimately.